Mhm. Hi, this is Dan Halsey with United Designers and Southwoods Ecological Design, here with the Earth Repair, Global Earth Repair Conference, May 3rd through the 5th in Port Townsend, Washington. Looking forward to seeing a lot of people there, and also having a lot of interviews, live interviews with people talking about climate change, climate adaptation, and action. Right now I'm with Ryan Copeland, who is in Texas. Hi, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks for joining us here, and I look forward to our discussion and your activities in Taiwan and in Texas, and what's going on with your life and kind of your observations. So let's start right with that. So as far as climate change goes, and from your experience, and mostly it's about your observations, what have you seen the trends to be going from what you've had in the past, the way things are now in Texas and places you've been, and where things are going in the future?
Okay, Dan. So I guess I'll start out in Texas since I've been here the longest, but since we're doing international, we'll go to Taiwan a bit too. I think the predominant challenges in a place is conservative as West Texas is not so much the technology that we don't have, but it's changing the mindset of people to adopt these things. So I don't think that all these climate change issues are really as unsolvable as we think. It's just mostly that you have to change the minds of the people who are implementing the things. All the things are in place that we can do with changing agriculture. It's just how can we make people consider agriculture in a different light, and it's changing consumers' needs and what they demand from producers, and also educating producers to make this in a profitable way. So that's kind of the biggest challenge I see. West Texas is a very strong conservative place in mindset and political bend also. So one of the things that really, I guess, works to my benefit is that I've grown up here, and there's a lot of um, validity to a person who's grown up here as sort of your roots are here. And for you to push a new idea, they can only handle so much. So it's about getting buy-in from the community in a way that pushes them forward in the right direction.
Has there been any trend of people opening up in the last months, years to the conversations, or is it pretty closed off?
Well, I've only been in Texas doing this as doing my current business and farming for about a year now. I was living overseas in Taiwan for a long time, and as well as I went to Australia for a while. Studied with some teachers there, Jeff and Kendall, and some other people, and then also New Zealand. So I came back kind of as a way to incorporate things that I'd seen overseas that weren't going to happen in a place without a local boy coming back to bring some of this stuff back, because these ideas are not going to really flourish in a place like this. So as it would happen that I was back years ago, and I ended up going back to Asia and Australia to study a bit more permaculture things. But there are some groups around here popping up that were interested in permaculture, and one of those groups, because I had been overseas more than everybody else and had seen some of the teachers that were more well known, I kind of ran an informal permaculture meetup, and I was teaching that for a while. Unbeknownst to me, some of the guys in it had gotten into permaculture because of them starting a community land trust, which was about educating people in our general area as well as internationally to sustainable issues. So when I came back to live here, they kind of looked me up and invited me to participate. And so that's how
Mm.
we've kind of tackled it as a sort of a group thing. And we're kind of establishing ourselves
So the
to,
sustainability was a little bit easier to transition into, as opposed to, say, the climate change in general, but other basically cultural practices or different relationships in being sustainable seems to be a lot more easy to start.
yeah, it was great to have people that were already interested in it because they're already getting the ball rolling. And like I said, West Texas maybe more than most places I've been in the world, there you need to have some local credibility for people to buy into your ideas. And the ideas that we need to change global warming and to capture carbon and put it back into the soil and to clean up our waterways and pesticides and herbicides, those ideas are available. It's not like we don't know what to do. We just need people to buy in to those ideas and to do them. So there's a lot more of the human element that maybe sometimes is overlooked if you focus too much on all the techniques. All those are the captivating ideas, which practitioners like to talk about. Really, what rolls the ball forward is let's get people to do these things, because we know what we need to do. We just need people to want to do that, and it to be profitable to do that too. So that has
Sure,
been
sure.
kind of my big focus. So I was over in Taiwan for a long time, and what I saw, and I think we mentioned before we started recording, you having a little difficulty accessing people in Eastern Asia and places to do these types of interviews. And I saw sort of a gap in material. If you go online and YouTube and look for anything with sustainability or permaculture or green living and English material, you're just going to find an unlimited amount. I can't even keep up with the teachers that I've gone to their classes, or much less people that are interested. So there's just really a lot of material out there in the English world. So whereas in the Eastern Asian world, in Taiwan in particular, I didn't see nearly as much. So my thought was that I was going to connect the two worlds and kind of cross pollinate in a way with Taiwan and then Texas, and sort of create a mutually beneficial educational program. So a lot of the
Sure.
Taiwanese people in East Asia are very, very interested for business purposes in English, which was ESL was a thing that I did for many years before this. So I know that they want that as a platform, but English is just the medium of discussion, and using that as the experience for the farm, teaching new farmers how to make sustainable living is a sort of, I think, a very good overlap of what they want with
Mhm.
English instruction, and then also what they need.
Sure. Are they having their own conversations about climate and what's happening on the island there?
Yeah, for sure. I think that it's it is behind the Western speed of just general environmental awareness. And you look at this, and you can look at like the Kuznets curve, where you see the sort of, okay, as median income rises and people start considering like, okay, we have this certain, there's a sort of tipping point to where like people have enough money or meeting their basic needs, and then they start seeing, okay, now that we have this money, let's see, oh, what have we done to our environment, right? So people who are lower down on the income curve are not as aware of, or maybe they've got other things on their plate, right? So Taiwan's a pretty well-off country income-wise, and it's starting to really pop up. A big issue for Taiwan that happened recently was after the Japanese nuclear problem with the earthquake, and then the
The
fallout of
Fukushima.
all the fallout there. Taiwan said, we're just right below Japan. They have 4, I believe it is, plants, and they closed down one of them. They're like, it's just was so politically dangerous, and people were just not willing to accept that. So I left recently for a couple of years and just went back, and just got back a couple of weeks ago, and the air quality had gone down substantially. We're looking at 100 plus ppm several times a week in the air. It was just horrendous,
Are
and
they
that was,
burning coal now, or what's the
yeah,
difference? Oh,
the
I see.
biggest coal plant in all of Asia is just in the city that I lived in for years. So it is a very big difference, because after they shut that nuclear plant down, they went straight to the coal, and they're trying to transition out of that. But that's a thing that it's not an easy decision. You have a lot of people on a very small island, and they have
Hmm.
a lot of power needs. So they switched off of nuclear, which is clean with a lot of dangerous possible outcomes, as well as where do we put this stuff and how long that lasts, infinitely
Right.
long storage problems, right?
Yeah.
So it's like not
That's a
really.
whole nother conversation. Coal
Yeah.
versus nuclear, and I've never, either one of them is bad. You might say it's like a lesser evil of the two. That'd be like a whole nother conversation about that. But yeah, to say, oh yeah, we need to shut down the nuclear power and then just start pumping coal into
Coal.
the air. Yeah, it's kind of I don't know
One
if
of
it's a net loss. It's probably a bigger than a net loss on there.
There's a transition somewhere, so you have to transition. You have to look what you're doing. So are you just considering that that's the end point, or is that the transition to a cleaner solution?
Right,
You
right.
have to have power in the meantime, though. So it has to be one of the available sources.
Mm-hmm. So
So
let's go to our second question, which is Texas or in Taiwan?
mhm.
What would be the basically an important climate change adaptation in that region? What are the things that would need to be done? Now, I've worked in Texas a number of times and been very impressed. They have their gray water rules for using gray water in the landscape. Things like that are pretty advanced compared to even my state, as far as how you can reuse water on the landscape. But in Texas and also let's just say in Taiwan, what would you compare the two, and what's the main thing that needs to happen to help people adapt to this new climate situation?
I think both of them in general, everybody needs to be involved with their food wherever they live in, how it gets produced, and to at least make a small amount of it to understand the process. In Texas, a big issue is that we have where I currently live, which is the high rolling plains west of Dallas, about 2 or 3 hours, just the very bottom of the rolling grass plains that goes up the middle of the United States. We get enough rainfall to not be a desert, but we are very fragile in the sense that we only have about two feet of rain per year, 24 inches. So our main sticking point, if you will, like is how to use water correctly, because you look at a lot of the setups and you can see this a lot of places, specifically Nevada and California Central Valleys and stuff, where they have all this aquifer water that's charged for hundreds of years and centuries to fill up to the certain level, and they deplete it at a level that's much faster than that, and then it desertifies that land and they move on. Will reach beyond the point of population capacity where there's not a place to move on to. So it's how to live inside of the rainfall that you're getting and produce an outcome of food, fiber, and medicines that you need to produce from our land. So we're currently mostly grazing, which is probably the most appropriate solution for this area, is grazing but it's grazing done in a very poor manner, usually a set stock rate. They just get set in a field and they're fed cubes and hay, and then they may have 2 fields per year, but between
Right.
two. But it's, if you go back kind of the Allen Savory ideas, it really managing them properly, that's probably the best use of our land is grazing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get kind of mix that in with the savanna system, which can produce additional yields on that same property. So in my area, a big thing that a native tree that we have is oaks and pecans, which are kind of a big canopy overstory for our area. So we're kind of in the process of our community land trust land to establish a sort of silvopasture system where currently we have sheep, which do very well on the lower quality grazing that we have. It's not real lush green pastures. These are South African breed called the Dorper, and a couple Royal Whites. But establishing that system is important. But I think that is one of the tricky parts for an established farmer, is that he already is making his living from an established thing. Even if it's
Right.
a one-way street over a cliff, he knows he can make money doing the chemicals, doing the pesticides or whatever, or at least get the subsidies and break even and buy all the equipment that he needs. But as a nonprofit, one of the things that we're able to hopefully provide for the community is to be a model to display certain different production methods, and maybe semi-financed by our off-site jobs, as well as donations that nonprofits inevitably get, grants and whatnot, to display this to other producers around who are doing it for a living. So they don't have the luxuries per se to just go experiment overnight and transition. So if we can act as a sort of medium to display these sort of activities, they can speed up their transition towards those things, hopefully as a display site. So we're looking to sort of display some of the sites kind of a savanna system, silvopasture that I described, and exploring different crops and different perennials mixed with livestock.
Sure, sure. Well, it's pretty tough too, I would guess, and you see this actually all over the world in some sad stories when somebody tries to change their system or tries to do it a new way. And everybody who's in permaculture knows this. Your family questions it. The bank questions it. Your buyers question it. I mean, everything in the economic system works against you because you still have bills to pay, probably some debt service. It's like going to some of the countries, you know, we're like even going to Haiti or somewhere like that, and then trying to tell them, oh, you need to do it a different way. And all the calories it's going to take to change that system, they don't have. They're just trying to get enough food to eat. And so now you're asking farmers to say, well, here's what you need to do, blah, 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 A, B, and C. Well, the investment they'd have to make, and then all the people they'd have to convince that it's a good idea takes a huge amount of energy. And to them, if they don't know for sure, nobody else has done it. It's pretty hard to do it. So that's what we need, are more models, kind of like what you're doing, to show people what those differences are, because the only change that comes and the adaptation comes is through people actually observing somebody being successful, you know, in that way. And hopefully also kind of developing it into the economic system, that it's also beneficial economically to do that, either by saving money or like you hear, being a soil farmer rather than a cattleman, you know, is basically, I think it was Joel Salatin or somebody was saying that he grows soil, you know, all the rest of the things on top of the soil are basically a byproduct of that. So, and I've been down to a couple areas in the Black Prairie, I think it's called, the southern or in eastern Texas.
Yeah, and the central part and the eastern part are the woodlands and the Black Prairie.
Right. And it was the same sort of thing where they were just having these animals on the land, but the land itself was basically just a place for them to stand, and it was compacted. The runoff was just horrible. So when it did rain, where did the water go? Well, it just went down the ravines, causing erosion, and then fill up the ponds with silt. So the practices are hard, but also, and if you're going to change those practices, like to come in with a bulldozer with a subsoiler, which is probably what it's going to take to break some of this up, that's a huge expense, and it's hard to convince people to make that change.
Yeah, it is. And then you have to display the success of that beforehand. On the flip side, I guess I'll bring up Taiwan. So in America, there's kind of two parts to that. There's the production of these systems, and there's consumers. So if you don't have the consumers who are asking for these products and services, then even if a producer wants to provide them with that, they're still not going to put their family out of, they're not going to put themselves out of business to make something consumers don't want. So that sort of the two things need to be developed in a way that's relatively even, or else the producer doesn't have a market, or the consumers don't have a product to buy if they want it, and there's nobody making it, right? So in Taiwan, one of the additional challenges is because Taiwan has such a high population base and such a small country. They're about the size of New Jersey, but 2/3 of it is mountains, and they have the population of Texas, in a country that's a third of the size of New Jersey. So you can imagine that the density levels are quite high. But historically, they were a breadbasket for China, and for a long time when they were just sort of an outskirts province, and they made a lot of food, but they've taken their population base. So you're talking about global warming and looking at challenges there. You're looking at the way that we've designed cities and how can we transition ourselves in not a terribly painful way, because when we have so many cities with so much population in such a close place, they need to bring food from outside. And if that food depends on very cheap oil prices, and oil prices aren't cheap, it becomes increasingly more and more expensive to sustain those massive urban centers and bring your food from far away. So I have worked in Taiwan. I'm starting a program where an exchange, which I've talked to you about this, and hopefully it'll be starting in 2020. But I'm going to, like you said, a lot of times people need to see these sites in action. And I want to bring some Taiwanese students over here and take them around the country and see some of these sites and expose them to different methods that are not really available, because they aren't going to see this in Taiwan. And so that way they can take some of this back and act as sort of new seeds of ideas, bringing
Right.
whatever things appeal to them that are happening in the States, and can bring that back. They do have some advantages in Taiwan that we don't have, but they have a lot of disadvantages. A big problem for Taiwan is their economy is doing so well that the land prices have gone up so much that it's more valuable for people to buy land as real estate. And then you have somebody come in and buy land for real estate. It's no longer an agricultural production field, and a farmer can't pay for that. Well, then what happens when you need food again and oil prices go up, and now you've got a condo on your rice field or whatever else? So that's a very different problem than West Texas. West Texas is land and plenty, and we've got it as far as you can see every direction mostly, but we need farmers who are interested in producing things. Mostly in West Texas, an issue is that you have more and more people who go out in the countryside and they want a 5-acre plot or a 10-acre plot to put their house, which is okay if they're interested in producing food, but mostly they just want little homestead, and they want to, takes more and more native land out of the equation and agriculture land, and just sets it in people who make their money in the urban centers and
Sure.
live
So
out
they
in the
have, you
countryside.
have space in Texas, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's bigger than some countries. Actually, Texans sometimes think they are a country, from what I recall.
We were
Uh,
for 10 years.
yeah. So you have the space. So with that, if there was large adaptations and changes where people were needing to grow their own food, and that it seems that Texas has land available, and then many times the soil is where I've been, even though it's dry, and sometimes you're surrounded by oil fields and cotton, things like
Mm-hmm.
that. The soil is basically tenable. It seems to be much of the times you could grow on it if you had a good water management system.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to speak about Texas in generalities because it's such a large place, from the coast to the top tip up there next to the Oklahoma Panhandle is 8, 9, 10 hours of driving. But in general, that's one of the things that I think is very amazing about the permaculture systems. It's easy to see in a semi-arid area when you use permaculture and the correct earthworks and swales and keyline and all these types of systems to see the differences with your neighbors. Like if you go to Jeff's place and east coast of Australia and see Zaytuna and you see his neighbors, well, it's more or less one of the better places in Australia because there's so few places get very much rain at all. But even then, there's a very stark difference with him and his neighbors because he has all these earthworks and rain catchment systems that are keeping his land hydrated whether there's rain or not. And so it is a pretty cool thing to do permaculture in West Texas because there's an opportunity to be such a standout, stark difference opposed to a place where it's already green and it's not as easy to see. It's very immediately apparent in West Texas with some swales and some key lines or some imprinting or some proper grazing practices to see someone who's doing something totally different. So I'm pretty excited about that. And the access is a big deal that most people in the world who want to do it. That's the thing I'm trying to coach the Taiwanese students with. I'm working with the college kids, and I'm going to start with is that they don't have the access to land like we do. It's pretty easy if you want to be in farming, at least in Texas, to find somewhere that you can get into it. And there's so many people that have land. Usually they're more or less, these people are well off and they buy land, doctors or lawyers or what, and they're looking for someone to take care of their land. And I've gotten several times where it's like, oh, you want a lease for your sheep? How much does it cost? It costs nothing. Just take care of our land. Because
Sure.
they just want to live in the setting, and some
Yeah.
sheep on their pasture is what they want to see. They don't want
Mhm.
to take care of sheep. But the Taiwan doesn't have that option because they have such high real estate prices. But there's other ways to get into it, and they're in the same position the whole world's in. Farmers are 60, 65. They're retiring or passing away, and there's no young people that want to do it, or not nearly enough to replace the current needs.
Mhm.
So how can we reverse that trend? So you still have to provide the young people with an option, even with land prices like Taiwan.
Sure. Well, can you tell us a little bit about, you were telling me earlier about this land trust that you have going. How does that work? How do people buy into it? And how does that system, because that sounds very intriguing, where people have opportunity to experiment, if nothing else, to actually have some land to work with.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the big crux of the issue. How do you get people on land that want to be on land doing something but don't have the capital to do it on their own, as well as how do you protect something that has been established beyond the generation of one person? Because one of the drawbacks is if you have somebody who's ecologically minded or conservation minded and they establish a system, their descendants may or may not be interested in carrying that out. They might want to sell it to a real estate developer and get a nice house on the beach or whatever. So the community land structure solves those two problems very well. There's also challenges. So what it is we set up a community land trust. This was started with that group of people who were in that permaculture class that I was teaching years ago. Unbeknownst to me, they had already bought the land, and they were taking permaculture because they'd gotten this land and they wanted to know what to do with it, right? But I came back years later after I moved back from Asia, and they said, hey, we've been doing this stuff with the land. Do you want to join us? So the Community Land Trust starts an NGO, nonprofit with the tax codes. They own the land, and each individual member buys in. Usually how many ever people buy in, and that's the fraction of the land cost. So 10 people, $100,000. Okay, each guy pays $10,000. But where it differs from private ownership is that I don't, as an individual, own 10%. I own 100%. And my neighbor also owns 100%. So I can't just say, hey, guys, I'm not really into this anymore. I'm going to buy out. I have to get the allowance of or the acceptance of a new buyer to come to replace me, which makes it a little less liquid. Mm-hmm. So you have to have people of like-minded interest together at first. And then the exit point of that is that when people come in who are interested in it, they have to be a cohesive group to fit the existing structure. It's not a suburban neighborhood where your neighbor leaves and you never talk to him and another guy moves in and you never talk to that guy and you don't really know your neighbors. These people have a common core interest and bonded by these certain ideas. And when people come and go, it is possible, but it's not as fluid. So that's a challenge there, but we just started. And then the second thing is it allows people who don't have access to buy that whole piece of land to have access to it and ownership of it without buying the whole thing. So I don't have the money to buy about 100 acres is what we have. I think it's 97 to be exact. But I can buy a fraction of that. And now since I'm the only person who is currently involved in agriculture right now, everybody's trying to transition out of city jobs. I have the use of all the grazing that we have with my small flock of sheep. So that's something that can be done on my own, ownership wise. So that's a big challenge overcome by that system.
Now there's a system that I heard about. I don't know if you're familiar with it, called farm share, where you're actually buying stock, or you're buying shares into a farm, and that might be an LLC or an LLP. With this situation, you have basically it's a nonprofit that owns the land, and you're all buying into it. So how do multiple people actually own a nonprofit?
I'm not as well versed in the legal structures of it, so I just can say generally that's how the structure works is that we own.
Oh, the trust, actually.
Yeah, the trust owns the land, and we're part of the trust. And the purchase price of access to the trust is a proportionate fraction of how many people are involved in it. That's basically how it works. And then we've considered different options so everybody it's sort of an intentional community and educational farm in the works there. But we've considered different options for that. And I think what we're going to come to do for the houses is like kind of a 99-year lease for, unlimited renewal rate. Because we considered looking into it where we would kind of cut out little house lots and you'd own that privately. But it was going to be, $20,000-$30,000 of legal fees to do this. So it was easier for us to have the nonprofit lease the home sites to the members on a renewable lease structure. So you have control of your house site, and we have the general land that's used in consensus with everybody else's needs. So if I do sheep, that's okay as long as it's not against our goals, and somebody
Right.
else can do another business as long as it's not against our goals. But ultimately, like a corporations were originally started as, there's a time period on it. It's like you do this thing, and as long as it's in line with the morals and the ethics and the goal of the community, then you can continue to do this thing. But if it doesn't meet those needs, then it has to cease to exist because it's no longer in concert or synergy with our goals.
Right.
So each
Right.
person can open their own individual entities. I mentioned earlier before we started, there's a glamping circle going now. I've got sheep. We're talking about maybe some cattle and some pigs, and then in the long term, setting up perennial crops. Probably oaks and pecans will be our overstory.
I see. So you have basically it's people that want to be part of it, but kind of like permaculture, it's a very small and slow solution as far as you're just kind of gradually people are getting into the thinking about what they're doing. There's really no rush for that. With a trust, is there a director, or are you the trustee, or do you have a main person who kind of oversees the trust?
Yeah, just like any sort of corporate setup or any nonprofit, there's a sort of a board, right? And there's a board member, and they certain people are eligible to get loans within the organization. And if you want to do that, you have to go through a certain process. So I worked with the NRCS, the National Resource Conservation Service, which gives a lot of assistance to landowners, which is pretty amazing. They'll do a whole variety of things, but you have to get certified via the agriculture office, the federal agriculture office, as an existing farm land, and then you
Sure.
can go to the NRCS, which was started with the Dust Bowl era. After that happened, they decided they needed something, and so they give a lot of assistance. And it depends each county or each region you're in how much money is on the plate, but depending on how you stack up in the line of things, there really are a lot of opportunities for some grants there, as long as
Hmm.
what they see is happening is in line with their own goals. Of course, being the government, they're pretty far behind, so they still have, chemicals and pesticides advertised in their conservation offices, but there's also a lot of money on the table for things like fencing, especially waterways,
Mm.
tunnels, removal of certain species. We've got a problem with junipers in our area, which is a management issue, suppression of fire. So the junipers come up and the oaks get overcrowded by them, but they'll come up and give you money to clear them out mechanically. And so
I see.
hopefully our biological elements like sheep can maintain that after we clear those mechanically.
Do you have a website that explains your land trust, or do you have any other sources for information for people that might be interested in that?
Um, I myself am actually a new member, so I haven't made the website, but I think the organization does. I probably would have to get back to you on that. I'm still in the process of entering because I just moved back last year, so I'm buying in a share as we speak.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Another thing that I think I might mention because it seems pretty valid. We have weekly meetings with the organization. We met last night. One of the structures. So if people are the biggest roadblock, not the technology, not the techniques, we know what to do. We know perennial systems, proper grazing management, not using pesticides, and using more integrated system with nitrogen fixing trees and replacing all these inputs. We know those things, but getting people to do them is the biggest hurdle, no matter where you're at in the world. So one of the biggest problems is government structures. And so sociocracy is a system that I believe it's from Holland, maybe Belgium, that our community is using. The consensus model was used.
Oh, sure.
Do you know much about sociocracy?
Yeah,
Have you heard?
actually, a good friend of mine actually teaches it in his Les Moore, is his name in London, and he teaches sociocracy. And I got a great primer from him when I was there a couple of years ago. And they did use it some with the ecosystem restoration camp for a while, along with consensus, trying to figure out what the best decision model was to work with. But yeah, it's fascinating, just all those things, or the hybridization of all those different models to
Mm-hmm.
help you get what you need. So what did you guys decide on?
So um, the guy who started our nonprofit is also a teacher of sociocracy, and he's in a a community organization, which is about helping intentional communities start up and how to decide on the decision-making process. So one of the kind of big pitfalls of consensus in the consensus model is that you get this one person who can start a loggerhead at any decision, and they don't have to present new recommendations or whatever. They just say no. So you get a sort of a one rainy cloud over the whole parade, and they ruin it by consensus, because you kind of get a flip of this. Okay, the majority can't suppress the minority, but then you get the one minority or two people minority or whatever that can sort of stop anything, and they're not required to present alternative choices or say any reason why they don't want to. It's just consensus. So one person's no stops. Right. And that stopped a lot of communities from existing, period, because there's no possibility for moving forward. So the sociocracy tries to take into account the individual's possible problems with any idea, but also doesn't give them the ultimate power to stop all progress in its entirety. So we have a sort of way where there's a whole complex idea, and I'm still learning about it. We had a class last night, but basically, if you have an idea and one person has a problem, then they're now required to participate with the people who have created the solution, which they are not okay with, to come up with another solution themselves and tell them why. So you can't just sit in the back and throw stones and no, but what's your idea? No, I don't have an idea. I just like to say no on that day. So they have to participate in it. And if they can't come to a better conclusion than what the original idea was, then we'll go forward with those ideas. So it's a way that one person that may have insight that we don't all have. So we don't just stamp over an individual's ideas.
Right.
But we also allow the majority to move forward if that person can't come up with a better idea that we can move us forward, that we need to happen. So a big thing about sociocracy is it says good enough for now, right? So we implement an idea, and there's this sort of permaculture review process. We implement an idea, and all the ideas have a timeline on it. So say, okay, you have some problems with this idea, but here's the idea. We're going to let it play out, and then after the end of a certain period, we're going to revisit it and say, okay, did it work? Did it accomplish our goals? Is it in line with our mission statement? And if it's not, how can we edit it or totally abandon it? And if it is, it becomes sort of a cemented process. So there's sort of a balance of that, which we hope can allow us to have more longevity and resilience in a community base, which I guess would be kind of chapter 11 permaculture class that kind of gets skipped over often. It's not all the cool, sexy techniques and hugelkultures and swales and stuff, but
it's tough. All the human interaction stuff is very tough with any organization, intentional community or whatever, and that's why it's great to have all these different kinds where people can experiment to see whether it works or gravitate for the ones that they would like to be a part of. Mm-hmm. So that sounds great. And do you think that with this space that you have, let's just say that we have some kind of issue where we have to do a quick adaptation. Do you think that 100 acres would support your entire group? Say there's other systems that you might be tied to with home and other resources, but with a certain amount of time with the people that you have, do you think that 100 acres could basically be self-supporting?
Well, I think there's a sort of myth to the absolute self-supporting, getting all your power and all your food, especially staples, because people say, oh, we make our fruits and whatever, but where's your bread and your wheats come? But I do think that we can be a center that A, is on its way to becoming more self-supporting, and B, can teach other people how to do that, because that's the important part, is the communal self-supporting. It's not trying to be these individual homesteaders that go out and do their own thing. When bad things happen, those people are actually not very resilient, even if their food systems are resilient, because they're not connected to the community. So it's considering the community's resiliency on top of your individual food support and fiber and medicine resiliency, because if you can train a community around you to go that direction, your community is a lot more resilient than maybe the Lone Ranger who's really good and got their one part of land that's making tons of food, but something happens eventually where that person needs outside help, and if that community is not there, that kind of crumbles. So we're kind of considering a lot more of the community aspect of it and training the local community to make an ultimate resilient region, hopefully, and maybe beyond that as we develop as an organization. But we're also testing ideas. But like you say, a lot of it comes to where, how fast are people moving? They feel comfortable now, and they're kind of like, okay, we're slowly moving to the land. But if there's a global event or a regional event that pushes it forward, we've already taken some steps, and that could speed us up. But there's definitely people within the organization who would like to go faster, live out there faster, get stuff planted faster, dig swales faster, and all that stuff. But it's a balance with everyday considerations.
Sure. Well, it sounds like you already have, I mean, you have a structure, socially, decision-making structure. You have the land, and you also are kind of familiar with each other as a community. So I can see right there, you're way ahead of most people. Even if you haven't done anything, you have a community of people that are somewhat like-minded that can discuss these things and also start making those changes, as opposed to starting from scratch and basically starting out of fear. You would have a lot less fear because you do have each other. And I would assume diverse interests and diverse skills. And also with those people, they're also connected to other people. So your resources are even that much more diverse with sources for things like that. So it sounds like an interesting plan. I think people would be interested to hear more about, and hopefully you get that website going and or blogging to see the pictures of your sheep and the land and any kind of structure that goes. So this is really a fascinating.
I do have my own Instagram, which is Toad and Oak Farms Instagram, but that's my private sheep enterprise, which is happening on the land. It's just that the general organization doesn't. So each individual might have a different enterprise, so they're responsible if they want to do their own website for whatever business they have on the side. But the group doesn't have that set up yet. We're still in the process. One of the things that I think is really important is sort of like Muhammad Yunus and some people out of the UK have put forth these social responsible businesses or triple bottom line businesses. So if we get businesses to turn a profit, which are accomplishing the goals that were maybe previously done by NGOs, instead of a business making a lot of money as it damages the environment, but for marketing or for greening their business, giving away to certain charities, to say, like, how about we revamp our businesses to accomplish those goals and they're profitable? Some things can't be profitable, but they still need to be done. So those will be nonprofits. And that's kind of where we're kind of in both of those. I'm trying to be in the social business model where I'm trying to turn a profit with my sheep. And then also the nonprofit is the education at our facility. You know, farmers may or may not have the luxury of transitioning in a way that they don't know whether they can make income, but a nonprofit can collect money based off their nonprofit status to further the research and the setting down of systems. Because what everybody finds in permaculture is very real, is that cool thing you saw at your teacher's farm, wherever your teacher's farm was, is not at your land. And when you get back home and you do it and you're like, that didn't look the same, or it didn't work the same, and doesn't sound the same, or, you know, it doesn't, each place is very specific to your culture and to your local environment. So we need lots of these regional centers to establish relevant sources for these farmers to transition to. And those can be nonprofits. And at some point, they're probably in equilibrium where there's enough, but we're not anywhere close to that now.
Right. Well, thank you for your time, Ryan. This has been wonderful talking to you, and look forward to keeping up with you, and maybe we'll have another discussion, because I think there's a lot more to talk about on probably the half a dozen different topics that we went through.
Yeah, for sure.
But welcome back to the States. I was glad that you were able to make it in time for us to have this discussion, and look forward to hearing more about what you hear about going on in Taiwan and then also in Texas.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, for watching another one of our interviews for the Global Earth Repair Conference. I'm Dan Halsey with United Designers, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.